Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to this online training course. This is a training course all about low-tech AAC for adults. It's delivered by Compass and the slides have been prepared by Helen Patterson and myself, Samia Malik, and we are both speech therapists at Compass. Compass are the Specialist AAC Service for adults in West London. On the map there you can see in orange all of the boroughs that we work in. We mainly work in the community, but we also work with inpatients at the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability in Putney. That's where we're based. Do feel free to have a look at our website for more information about referrals and how we work and how you can refer your clients to us if you're in our patch. Our website will be at the end of this PowerPoint on the last slide. So, key learning points for this presentation. We want you to gain an awareness of the range of low-tech AAC systems and strategies available. We want you to consider the factors involved in creating a low-tech system for your clients. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll feel confident in creating a low-tech AAC system that's tailored for your clients. This is the agenda. So we'll start off with a bit of an introduction about low-tech AAC. We'll think about systems for direct access, that's for people that can point. We'll think about systems for people who can't point and need alternative access. We're going to talk about using symbol vocabulary, and we'll finish off with some final tips and tricks. So AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, and essentially it's any system or device that helps someone to express themselves when their speech is unclear or they are not able to use speech at all. There's heaps and different types of AAC, but it can be split up into broad categories. So unaided AAC describes AAC where there's no equipment or any tools involved. You don't need anything to use unaided AAC. And essentially that covers facial expressions, body language, gestures, signing, and finger spelling. So any of those that you're using to express yourself, you're using unaided AAC. Aided AAC is a type where some kind of equipment or tool is used, and that can be further split up into three categories. So we've got low tech, which is basically paper-based. It's not electronic, you don't need batteries, and it doesn't need a power source. You've got mid-tech, which is a little bit of tech. It might need batteries and it's got some voice output. So a Big Mac or a GoTalk would fit into this category. And then we've got high-tech AAC. So that's really the most complex devices that require mains charging and always have voice output. For example, a grid pad. So today, of course, we're focusing on low-tech, which is basically paper-based AAC. So why are low-tech aids so important? Well, high-tech AAC is not always available or accessible. For example, when someone's in the bath or if they're rushed to hospital, if they're going on respite and it's not possible to take the high-tech system. If someone's traveling in a car or on a train, they're not able to have their high-tech system set up for them. It's really important to have a low-tech system in place that's robust and reliable that your client is used to using. It's really easy to overlook low-tech, focus on high-tech, and then actually when something goes wrong with the high-tech and it breaks or it runs out of charge, there's a bit of a crisis. So it's much better to plan ahead for that and make sure there's a paper-based system in place already. Some people feel that low tech is actually quicker for them than having to use a computer where you have to turn it on and wait for it to load and then set up your switch or your eye gaze. Some people find it a lot of hassle and actually they just prefer using something simple and robust like a paper chart. So, things you need to consider when you're making something low tech for your client is these three key areas. So their functional use of it, how they're going to access it, and what their language skills are like. So we'll talk a bit more in detail about these three areas now. Functional use. You want to have a really, really clear idea of where the gaps are for your client at the moment in their communication. What are you hoping this low tech system is going to achieve? What gap is it filling? Does your client want to use it for having long, extended conversations with their family and friends? Do they just need it to give basic requests to carers in a day centre? Do they need it to have complex medical conversations with their healthcare staff? Why does this person want to communicate? And what do you need the low tech to be able to do? And who are they going to use it with? Who are their main communication partners day to day? And what about on a weekly basis? And what about just sometimes? Get a really good idea of all the people that this person is interacting with and the kind of communication they want to achieve in those different scenarios. And think about all the different communication functions. Does this person want to tell jokes? Do they want to be able to ask questions? Do they want to do a presentation? What are their goals? And lastly, where will they use it? Are they going to use it every day at home, but they prefer to do signing at their day centre? Or do they want to use this low-tech chart in the community when they go out and about, but at home they're happy to use their body language? Again, think about all the situations in that person's routine and what's happening for them in terms of their communication. Secondly, we need to think about access. So the biggest question, I suppose, is can this person point to a chart with their fingers? If so, we're going to talk about direct access, and that means someone can point to a chart. If they can't, then we're going to have to be a bit creative about how they're going to access their chart. So can they use another part of their body? So have they got really good eye control, or can they use their head quite well? Can they point using their foot? Can they point using their elbow? It's also important to know how your client indicates yes non-verbally. Really, any kind of gesture is fine as long as it's universally agreed and everybody knows it and it's documented. So some people, they look up for yes. It might be a slight head nod. They might be raising one of their arms for yes. Just make sure it's established, it's reliable, and it's written down so everyone can see it. And lastly, you need to know if your client has any hearing or visual difficulties, because that's going to impact on how you design the chart. And lastly, your client's language skills. So are they literate? Can they spell? Can they identify whole words? Or actually, are they not comfortable with letters at all? Do they need symbols? And how familiar are they with symbols? Are they already using a particular symbol set at their college? Are symbols new to them, but maybe they can recognize some familiar words? You need to have an idea of how much someone can use literacy and or symbols and what they're going to need to learn. So let's start off with some AAC systems that are suitable for pointing, also known as direct access. There are so many different types of systems that you can choose from that are ready-made online that you can just download. But you probably find that you have to tweak it. All of our clients are individuals, and trial and error is always a good thing. So you can download and print off a chart and actually adapt it as you go along if you need to make some access changes. There's heaps to choose from, or you can make your own. Just keep remembering the functional use, access, and language skills. Keep those things at the forefront of your mind. You're trying to make sure that this system meets your client's communication needs. That's the main goal. And actually, how you lay it out, what color coding system you use, whether you use symbols or text or a combination, that is all going to be decided by you knowing your client and what's best for them. You can absolutely create your own system from scratch, even though there are heaps out there that you can access easily if you need to. So let's start with text-based AAC. Let's say you've established that your client is literate and can spell and read very proficiently. Some additional things you'll need to think about is casing. So are uppercase or lowercase letters more familiar? Do they have any visual difficulty that's going to make lowercase letters more difficult for them to identify? Have they used a keyboard before? Are they very used to a laptop keyboard layout, such as a QWERTY? Or do you think they're going to prefer an A, B, C, D alphabetical layout? Is there a color combination that they find easier to read with? How much movement is required across the chart for them to point to each letter? Where should this chart be positioned? Should it be held right up in their eye line? Does it need to be lowered down? Are they going to have it on their lap? Are they going to have it stuck up somewhere? And what font size are you going to need? What font style are you going to need? Again, this is all you can ascertain this through trial and error. Just try it, see how it goes, and tweak as you go. So here's a couple of examples. So on the left there, an ABC chart. As you can see, the letters are laid out alphabetically. And there's a couple of additional features here. So you can see the vowels have been highlighted in yellow. We've got some phrases along the top there. That's just quick and snappy phrases so the person doesn't have to point out each letter. This person's got access to numbers in the bottom left. The hand is covering it up, but you can see there's some numbers there. And also in the bottom right, you've got some letter combinations as well. Again, just making it a little bit quicker and easier so that person doesn't have to point to every single letter. Punctuation is missing on this particular letter chart, so you might want to add a couple of punctuation points, maybe full stop, question mark, and exclamation point. Depends on your client, depends how important that is to them. I think a full stop certainly would be useful because it marks the end of the sentence, so that might be helpful. And you can see here, for whatever reason, lowercasing has been chosen as the preferred option. So that's the ABC chart on the left. On the right, we've got a very different layout known as QWERTY. So you'll be familiar with this. This is the keyboard layout for your computer, your laptop, and your phone. Much more familiar, numbers being on the top row there, corresponding with the top row of the letters. And we've got some additional features here where on the bottom it says mistake, so they can indicate when there's been a mistake. And also on the right hand side, they can tell you when to guess. And this person's got access to a full stop. What's nice about this chart is everything is sort of in the middle. So when this person is pointing to letters, they don't have to travel very far with their hand all across the page. The layout is quite central. So there's just a couple of examples for you, but you'll find many more online. So phrases can be really useful to add to a letter chart. It's essentially making it easier and quicker for someone to get a message across, and they don't have to go through the effort of spelling out every letter. So emergency phrases fit the bill quite well. They're useful to have on there. If you're about to have a seizure or you're in a lot of pain, you don't want to be spelling out every letter for that phrase, so they're quite handy to have on there. Also, phrases that someone's going to use every day frequently, they just need to get out quite quickly. So instructions like, I need a minute, it's not on my device, I need a tissue, I need my medication. Those kind of messages can be really useful to add onto the chart. Some of your clients will feel it's really important for them to have social greetings on there. Some of our clients love to say please and thank you. They love to say good morning. They want to ask how we're doing. So you can ask those, you can add those onto the chart. And similarly with questions, there might be important questions they want to ask regularly. What's for lunch today? Or is so and so visiting today? So you can generate these phrases together with your client and you can prioritize them and see how much space you've got on your letter chart to add them. There we are. So that's the example we saw before. In this particular example, there's just 4 phrases there at the top. And in this case, it seems to be sort of around strategic communication. They're trying to repair communication breakdowns with those phrases. But as I said, there can be any phrases that your client feels are useful and important to them. On the right side, we've got an example of adding phrases to symbol charts. We're going to talk more about symbols later on, but you can absolutely add phrases to symbol charts. Again, similar principle. It saves the client the effort of having to build a sentence rather than pointing to 3 different symbols for I don't like. They've got it there in one. The one caveat I would say is be a bit careful with that. If your client still has a lot of language learning potential, adding phrases might limit them because essentially they're learning that symbol as a chunk and they're not learning the component parts of that sentence. But you weigh that up with the functional use of just getting a message out quite quickly. So do think about it. There are pros and cons for having phrases on symbol charts. It can be quicker and easier, but we are then depriving the client of learning the broken down sentence structure. So that's just something to consider, really. So topic boards can be really useful in repairing communication breakdowns. I find them most useful when somebody has got speech but it's quite unclear and you're just trying to pin down what they're talking about. You might have understood a fair few number of words in their sentence. You're just not quite sure exactly what they're talking about, or if it's now or it was in the past, or so this can be helpful. You can give your client a topic board and they can just point to the topic they're talking about just to clarify. Are you talking about people or a place? Are you talking about a thing? Are you talking about an action? Are you asking me a question? The other way that this can be used is as a conversation starter. So you can ask your client, what do you want to talk about today? And then they can indicate. So this can be quite nice. And of course, you can use this in conjunction with your letter chart. So you might start off with this. This might be on the front page of their communication booklet. And, you say to them, what do you want to talk about today? Oh, you want to ask me a question. Okay. And then you can they can flip over to their letter chart and then they can ask you the question. They can spell out the words that they wanted. So you can use these in conjunction. Visual scene displays. These are essentially meaningful, familiar photographs for your client with some added text boxes. And they're a really nice way to promote social interaction and sharing information and conversation starters as well. So if you're creating one, make sure the person is really involved in choosing the photo. So they might have photos on their phone or their iPad that they want to include, and then generate some phrases, generate some text boxes with them. This will essentially be used for them to share information with others. So the way you'd use this is you both look at this photograph together, or this visual scene display, and very naturally you may well ask, oh, this is a lovely photo. Who's this young girl in the photo with you? They can then point to the text box and answer your question and say, it's my granddaughter. And you might then say, oh, what's her name? And then they can point to Sierra. So it promotes a really nice naturalistic conversation. It's a nice way for people to share events and key people with you. And then the text boxes just add an extra layer of detail, which is really nice. Visual scene displays support early communicators and people who really need their communication to be context-based. So it's very successful with clients who have a learning disability and aphasia as well. Okay, so hopefully we've given you some ideas for your clients that can point. Now we're going to think about your clients that have more difficulty with access, so where pointing is more difficult. The first thing you can think about is just changing the layout and the spacing on your page. So on the left here, we've got these 8 symbols that are quite close together. If someone doesn't have the fine motor skills to be able to isolate and accurately select those symbols, you can add more space in between them and it gives more room for error. So it spaces them out nicely, and that might just be enough to help someone to point to a symbol more accurately, just giving a bit more space between the symbols on the right there. Similarly, you can think really outside the box and have this kind of semicircle shape. This can help for people that can't isolate their finger, but they can fist point. So that's another great idea for someone that's not able to use their fingers anymore, but they can actually lift their hand and point with their fist. So a key guard on the left there, the ones that you can buy, they're usually made of plastic and they're quite robust. But you can make one yourself. Essentially what it does is it isolates the letters, so the person can feel where the boundaries of each letter box is. So on the left here, you can see this person's used some Velcro, just thin strips of Velcro, and that's going to help someone get that feedback to know that they're within the right parameter for that letter that they're targeting, and it just helps to differentiate between the letters. So that can be useful. You could use Velcro, you can also use pipe cleaners, you could use some string or some rope. So feel free to be creative with that and give that a try. On the right hand side there, you can see someone's using a stylus. So you might be used to seeing a stylus that's more like a pen, that you hold like a pen, and that might be useful enough, but you can get these kind of adapted styluses or styli. So someone can grip it, do a nice hand grip there and use it in the way that you can see in the photo. So there are lots of different types, and if you need any advice about that, please feel free to give us a call or email us and we'd be happy to advise you. Color coding is another way to ease access difficulties, but keep it all on the same page. So color coding basically allows your client to have less movement, but still express what they need to. So this one is an example. So we've got an ABC layout there with letters, and we've got coded access. It's color coded. So what happens is that the person points to the number and then the color to indicate the letter. So on the bottom right, you've got a key there with the letters and the colors. So rather than them having to physically point to the letter, actually, they just use the key and they point to the key as a reference to the chart. So that's quite clever. As you can imagine, it takes quite a lot of cognitive load and learning. So do make sure your client's able to cope with that. But once it's set up, it works really well. And you can see the spacing difference between someone having to use all of that left side page to physically point to the letters compared to that little space in the bottom right, just having to move their finger a little bit as the key. So that might be something that works for your clients. Okay, so we're on to partner scanning. So these are also known as listener mediated scanning charts. And these charts are used when the person really doesn't have any physical movement to be able to point to a page at all. And they're going to have to rely on their partner to scan through options, and then they indicate somehow that yes, that's the option I want. So what's really important for this access method is having an established yes. in body language that is established and known by everybody, and that's quite clear as well. Um, some people try to use a blink as their yes, and it can be successful if the person's able to do a long blink, but quite often it does get confused with their normal blinking, which is quite difficult. So the yes can be indicated, sorry, the yes can be indicated in a number of different ways. Some people will look up for yes. Some people will move their left hand for yes. Some people will like do a long blink for yes. So just make sure it's reliable and it's been practiced lots to make sure it's really meaningful. So here's some examples of partner scanning charts. On the top there, you've got a flip chart, and essentially it's an ABC format, and you just flip over so it's only presenting one row at a time. So that's an easier cognitive load, and it's not so visually distracting compared to the letter chart at the bottom, which has all of the letters ready for the client to see, and the communication partner will scan through each one and it's all just there. Whereas with the flip chart, it's presented one row at a time. So the way it works, actually, I'll stay on here and we'll work through the coloured example at the bottom. The way it works is I'm the communication partner. I hold up this chart and make sure that my client can see it, and I know they can see it and they're able to see all the letters and the colour coding is okay for them. And we'll start off and I say, right, first word, first letter, is it in row A? And I point to row A. And then I wait for a yes. If I don't get a yes, I move on. Is it in row E? I wait for a yes. If I don't get one, I move on. Is it in row I? If they indicate yes, I then move along the columns and I say, is it I? Is it J? Is it K? Is it L? And again, I'm waiting for a yes. Once I've got a yes, let's say the letter is L, I'll make sure I write that down. It's really hard to keep track of it in your head. Please don't try and do it. Maybe once you're really, really experienced, you can. I still have to make sure I have a pad of paper with me. Write down the letter L, and then you say, okay, second letter. Is it in row A, row E? And you repeat the process, and you keep going until they've completed their message. So that is basically how it works. The other way to go about this is, rather than waiting for yes, someone can say no after each option. That's not so commonly used because it's quite fatiguing. It's quite a lot of effort to say no, 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 no for lots of options. So that's not really recommended, but it might be someone's preference. So it's worth asking your client about. This is what I mentioned before. So establishing someone's yes and no responses, really, really important. And then make sure it's written on their chart or in their communication guidelines or in their book. Key things to think about when using partner scanning. As I said, how does the person indicate yes? Does the person need to see and hear the chart, or hear the letters read aloud, or just see the letters pointed to? So essentially, if you've got someone that's got a hearing problem and they can't hear you scanning, they need to be able to see you really clearly visually scanning with your finger. So you're pointing at each row and letter going through, or the other way around. So if a person's got a visual impairment, make sure they can hear you nice and clearly, and you're going nice and slowly and giving audible options for them. As I mentioned, I really recommend that you write down the letters as you go along to keep track. If you think there's been a mistake or an error, how are you going to address that? I can usually tell if I've made a mistake or something's going wrong, and I'll just say, let's pause. I just need to ask, have I made a mistake? And they can indicate yes or no. And it's also worth thinking about, does this person mind if I guess what they're going to say? If you're halfway through a word and you think you know what it is, it's always polite just to ask and say, "Can I guess?" Because some people, even if they know that you know what the word is, they want to keep persevering and complete their word. So always ask first before guessing. So partner scanning can be used really for all different types of AAC. So you can use it for phrase lists as well and phrase books. So here's just an example. You've got lots and lots of phrases that are important to the client, and you can just scan through them and say, is it in category A, category B, or category C? They indicate yes. Are you uncomfortable? Should I move your arms? Should I move your legs? Yes. Okay, let's move your legs. So you can use that principle and apply it to any design of text, phrase, or symbol-based communication chart or book. So the pod book that we saw earlier, you can use it with partner scanning just as well. So again, you can just say, are you asking a question? Do you want something? Do you like something? And you wait for a yes. Exactly the same principle. And the same with any communication book as well. So moving on to people that might have visual difficulties, using high contrast colors can be helpful. So this is an example of one where we've got yellow cells on a black background. So do liaise with your client's ophthalmologist or their MDT or the family members. There might be certain color combinations that work better for someone with any visual problems. Widget and PCS also have specific symbols that are designed with visual impairment in mind. So the widget examples, for example, the symbols are a lot clearer and there's less detail in them. So the picture of the farm on the right is a lot clearer than the one on the left. And similarly with the cereal, it's been modified. On the right-hand side, the PCS examples, you can see high color contrasting being used. And again, the symbols are simplified. You can also experiment with tactile letters. So these particular ones can be bought online and they correspond with Braille, but you can actually try making your own. So you could use Velcro to form a letter tile that someone can physically feel the letter. You could use pipe cleaners to do the same thing. Have a think about that, and if you need any more support, just get in touch with us. So moving on to eye pointing. If someone struggles with physical movement in most of their body, but they've got reliable eye movements, they can use eye pointing to access their AAC systems. The most common and popular way to do that is to use an E-Tran frame, which is essentially a Perspex board or a frame with a hole cut in the middle. So in this picture, you can see that the board is positioned between the communication partner and the client. And then on the frame, you've got a number of boxes with either letters or symbols or phrases, whatever your client needs. So essentially, what the person will do is they will look at the box that they want to select, and you'll have to interpret that eye movement. You'll have to follow their eyes and confirm their choice. Now, because it would be really hard to eye point to individual letters on the board, a color coding system is used called encoding. So essentially, the letters of the alphabet are grouped. So it's a two-step process. So what happens is the person looks to the group of letters or symbols first. So in this example picture, let's say they wanted to select the letter A. They would look at the group that the letter is in, and then they would actually look at the circle of color to indicate which color the letter is. So if they wanted to go for A, they'd look again at that green circle at the top left there to indicate A. But if they wanted to select the letter D, they'd first look at the box that it's in, so that's the top left, and then to indicate that it's pink, they look in the bottom left. Can you see the pink circle there in the bottom left? So it's a two-step process. Things you need to think about is the person colorblind? Can all the colors be seen? You need to make sure the person can move their gaze left, right, and up and down for this frame to work. And where's the best position for the chart? You do need to be able to see the client's eyes through the hole, but if their head is positioned off to one side, you might have to compensate for that when you're using the frame. There are different types of encoding. That was just one example that I gave you with encoding with dots, but you can encode with outer borders as well. There's all different ways to do it, and it's just about what works for your client and their cognitive load. Some tips for using an eTran frame. Try and make sure you give them feedback. So it can be helpful to have a running commentary. It's just to confirm their choices, to say, I think you're looking here, and then you tap the box or the symbol. I think you're telling me the letter M, or you're looking at the bed symbol. And hopefully you'll notice from their body language if something's not quite going right. You can always go back a step. If they indicate that you've made an error, you can go back a step and they can repeat that letter. Same with partner scanning. Make sure you've got a pen and paper handy to note down the letters as you go along. And you can use eTran frames with phrases as well. So you've got an example there. This is actually a fantastic free resource. It's called a Speak Book, and it's actually a whole book of phrases that you can customize, that you can use for a client with good eye movements. You can also combine access methods. So this is an AEIOU board from Amy and Powers. And what you could set up here is that the person looks at the category that the letter is in, and then you can scan through. So let's say they looked at the box in the bottom left. So you'd indicate that and you say, I think you're looking at this box, and you tap it. And then you can scan through the letters. So is it O? Is it P? Is it Q? Is it R? And you're waiting for their yes signal, whatever that might be. Eye linking is fairly new in the world of AAC, and it's essentially a clear sheet with all of the letters on. You can just about make it out in the picture there. And essentially, the way that it works is that you ask the client to look at the letter that they want to select. And as the communication partner, you move the eye link chart around until you are making direct eye contact with the client. And then you know that you've selected the right letter. So there's a lot of moving around for you to do with the chart. And it can be a little bit intense making eye contact with somebody. Some clients don't like it, but it can be quite accurate, really, because you once you've made the eye contact, you definitely know that you've got the right letter, and there's slightly less cognitive load because there's no encoding or color coding in this system. So that's worth having a look at. If someone's got good head movements, you may be able to attach a laser pointer to their glasses, or they can wear it on a cap on their head. So if they had a chart that's mounted or up on the wall or in a stagnant place, being held up very, very robustly, they can then use the laser pointer to make their selections. Again, they can make selections with letters, symbols, or phrases. So that's another option for you. Okay, we're going to move on and talk about symbols now. So for your clients that are not literate, they can't use text and letters, you need to be using symbols. Usually for clients that have some kind of language impairment, or have English as an additional language, that's also a good time to use symbols. And essentially symbols are just pictures that represent ideas and words. Symbols can be really easy to identify if they look like the object they're meant to represent, if it's something straightforward like an orange, for example. But it can be a lot harder to represent abstract words like finished or more or stop. So you do need to think about what kind of symbols you're using for your client, and there's quite a bit to think about. There are lots of different symbol sets available, that have different kind of features and pros and cons. These are just some examples. We've got Makaton in the bottom left there. So they are black and white line drawings. We've got PCS in the top left there. These are more colourful. They have some actions in them. And in the top right, we've got symbol sticks. They tend to be more like line drawings. But again, they do have colour. And we've got widget in the bottom right there. It's got a whole range of symbols there using colour, and they're quite realistic. The people symbols. So there might be a particular symbol set that the day centre or the college or the respite centre uses already, and then it's a good idea to try and match that if you've got access to that same symbol set. Otherwise, your clients are having to learn a new symbol set, which can be a bit tricky. So PCS have released a new set of symbols which are in context symbols. So these symbols are not just depicting something happening in isolation. You can see it gives you a bit of context in the background there. So this can be really helpful for your clients with aphasia. Just something to think about in terms of symbol recognition. Quite often people think that there's a hierarchy and that objects are most easily recognizable, and then people go on to learn photographic representation and then symbolic representation. And actually, there's a really interesting link there that provides a literature review that basically says that's not really the case. And actually, what's more important in terms of someone recognizing a symbol is not whether it's a symbol, a photo, or an object. It's actually about that person's experience with that symbol or photo, their ability to learn, and also the iconicity of the symbol, which is basically how easy it is to recognize. So just that example there with apples on the bottom, in number one, even though that is a symbol, that's not that looks to be easier to recognize as an apple than picture number two, because it's much clearer. You've only got one thing. It's quite a clear image. In the photograph number two, there's lots going on. There's lots of detail, and it's not quite so clear. So that's just to make you aware and help you to think about when you're deciding whether to add photos or symbols. Don't be concerned that you have to follow a certain hierarchy or they all have to be the same. Actually, it's perfectly fine to have a mixture of symbols and photos. So you may well have symbols for in the majority of someone's communication book, but actually when it comes to depicting mum and their pet dog, and their favorite custard, it might be very well appropriate to have photos of those things. It's all about making it easy for your client to recognize and use functionally. So when you're choosing symbols, think about what your clients used before, what they're used to. If they already have a symbol set on their high-tech device, try and make it the same. And just be careful of using free symbols if you don't have access to paid symbol software. Free symbols are free for a reason. They often can be difficult to depict. It's difficult to understand them. So this one, for example, we've given as an example. What does that mean? That could mean a range of things. It could mean frustrated or annoyed or disgusted. So we do recommend investing in symbol software if you can. We've talked a little bit about this, but if you've got lots of detail or context in a photo, it can be difficult for someone to recognize that. So, just another example here, the symbol here on the left of a cookie is not so clear as the actual photo on the right there. We know, particularly for our autistic population, that there's lots of evidence that they have weak central coherence, which means that they find it difficult to filter out the unimportant details in an image and focus on the important stuff. So we kind of have to do that for them. We need to make things really clear. So if they love eating Oreos and that's their favorite biscuit and that's the only biscuit they eat, it's probably a good idea to have the photo of an Oreo rather than a generic biscuit or generic cookie. So when you're choosing which vocabulary to add onto a chart or a book, you need to know your client's preferences. You need to know what their motivators are, the kind of things they like to chat about. You need to identify the communication opportunities in their daily routine. You want to think about all the environments that they communicate in, think about their communication partners, and you can use a tool such as a talking mat to generate vocabulary from your client. It's a great idea to ask your client what kind of things they want to talk about. So for symbol users, quite often they will use communication books, and that's a really broad term. There are heaps and heaps of different designs and layouts, and really there's no right or wrong format. It's just about thinking what's going to fit with your client, what's going to suit them. Again, thinking about their functional use. Is this format going to enable them to ask the questions they need to? Is it going to enable them to take part in conversations with their family? Can they make requests as they need to? So once you've selected some appropriate vocabulary for your client, you need to think about how you're going to organize it and lay it out on a chart or in a book. And as with most things in AAC, there is no right and wrong. It's just what fits for your client and what's functional. Have a think about whether your client is still developing their language skills quite significantly, or if you're just looking for the system to utilize the language that they've already got, because the different systems will lend themselves to functional use, or further developing language skills, and that will make more sense when I talk about each way of organizing the vocabulary. So these are just some of the ways to give you ideas. So you can organize the vocabulary according to activity, category, or language. So we'll go through each of these in turn with some examples. So organizing vocabulary by activity, this provides contextual cues for the user, and it works pretty well for predictable communication, but it is quite limiting. So the example we've got here is you've got a folder of vocabulary for at home. That's the activity, or the task or the setting, at home. And when you press on that button, it opens up with some more language, and you've got some sentence starters on the left, and then you've got your nouns basically on the right. You've got your actual fringe vocabulary on the right. So as you can see, it's pretty good for if someone wants to communicate basic messages that are quite predictable, and you feel confident that you've covered all of their language functions with those sentence starters. Another good example of using this is sort of social conversations. So the activity might be introducing myself or chatting, and then your sentence starters would be, hello, my name is, how are you, I'm doing fine. So quite predictable, routine expressions that works well for an activity-based categorization, essentially. Other examples you might have for activities are, at the day center, and then you've got all the people and requests and nouns that you need in that one folder. Or the activity might be at the beach, and again you've got a mixture of language within that folder. So it provides context, certainly, for your user. Another way to organize it is by category, which sounds similar, but there is a slight difference. This is to do with semantic categories, essentially. So the example I've got there is, for example, food, drinks, people, body parts, feelings, places. I'm sure you've seen plenty of communication books organized in this way. Um, and this is predominantly noun based. It works pretty well for requesting items if that's your client's primary communication function. But again, it's quite limiting for users that need to express anything unique or outside the box or what you haven't already put on there for them. And you can combine different organizations together. So you might go into the food folder, and then again, you might have some sentence starters for I want, I like, I don't like, do you like. So you can still have some language there, but again, it's pretty limiting. A language-based organization is based more around linguistics and the different parts of speech. Now, this really encourages language and literacy development. This is for your clients that you feel have potential to build more on their language skills and build up their sentences. And this, because of the nature of it, allows for much more flexible and unique expressions. This is for your clients that are really keen to tell you about what happened on the trip to the zoo yesterday. And they're going to be using language that you haven't predicted necessarily. So they've got enough language on this symbol system that actually they can create their own novel utterances. So this is an example of a language-based organization here, and it's color-coded. So we've got the pronouns on the left in yellow, and then we've got some verbs in the green in the middle, and then we've got a function word, and then we've got our folders of nouns or activities or fringe vocabulary on the right. So it's very easy to build a sentence here. It's quite natural to go from left to right and build a sentence. And what's quite nice about high-tech displays that are organized in this way is they can be dynamic. So actually, as you type the sentence, it predicts what you're going to say and it changes the symbols accordingly. So do check out our symbol apps course as well. We'll talk a bit more about that on that course. So we're going to talk a bit about core words. Core vocabulary essentially are high frequency words that we all use, and they make up about 80% of our vocabulary. They tend to be the smaller function words, and they seem to encompass words that are not nouns. So it's words such as yes, no, finished, more, go, here, there, you, me. So really wide range of words, but generally not nouns. Nouns are also known as fringe vocabulary, which are basically less frequently used words. They only make up about 20% of what we're saying. And core words are really important to include on AAC systems because they're so powerful. Because you're able to use them in a wide range of settings, because they're not specific, that enables people to communicate in all different settings and environments if they're able to use core words. So it's well worth investing your time in teaching your clients some core words. I'll give you an example to make it a bit clearer. If we had a fringe-based communication chart or a noun-based communication chart here going to the cafe, I'm quite limited in what I can express here. So I can request a tea or a coffee. I can say how many sugars I want in there. I can say I want some cake. I can say I want some biscuits or some milk. And that's pretty much it. I'm kind of stuck at requesting. If I've got some good body language and facial expressions, I might be able to ask you a question. I might be able to point to you and then point to the tea and ask you if you want tea. But it's quite limiting, really. Now, if we just add a little bit of core vocabulary here, suddenly I've got access to a lot more language and I can do a lot more with this chart. So I could say, I like cake. Do you like cake? Look at those biscuits. I want more tea. I want more milk in my coffee. I want 2 sugars in my coffee. Look at you. You've got coffee. No milk for me. So you can see there, suddenly, I'm able to build many, many more phrases and sentences just by adding a few core words in. And when you're making a communication book or a chart, it's well worth thinking about the balance of those core and fringe symbols, really. You want to have a lot of core words on there. I think Janice Light recommends 3 parts core words to 1 part fringe. That's the kind of ratio that's recommended. Again, you know your clients. If core and abstract vocabulary is something they really struggle with, you may not use so many, but definitely think about including at least a couple, so they are able to tell you if they want something different that's not on their communication book, or that something's wrong. You can just have a couple on there. So this is just an example of a communication book with both, similar to what I showed you before. You've got core words that stay static, that you can use in any setting and any activity. And then you've got tabs leading onto a flip chart for some fringe vocabulary. So do have a think about the combination of core and fringe that's going to work for your client. So PECS is a very specific and structured formal AAC system, which does require training. You must go on the training before you try and implement this, because there's a lot of important theory around it. It stands for Picture Exchange Communication System, and this system's great for promoting initiation of communication. It teaches early communicators the point of communicating, and it's based in behavioral analysis, behavioral theory. Essentially, you teach your client to pick up the paper symbol, give it to you, and in return, they receive the rewarding item that's depicted on the symbol. So it's very quick, it's very rewarding, it's highly motivating, and clients often will progress through the 6 phases quite quickly once they get the hang of it. The first phase is usually the most tricky. And there's a very specific way to teach your clients how to do this, including hand-on-hand prompts. So if you're interested in that, please do look it up and make sure you go on the training. Another more formal system you might have heard of is POD. That's Pragmatic Organization Dynamic Display. Again, this is a whole system that does require training. So if you're interested, please look it up. And essentially, this communication book or chart is laid out according to a language function, a communication function. So rather than having categories such as food and drink, people, places, the categories here are: I'm asking a question, or I want to show you something, or something's wrong. So the organization is different, and it relies on the person having the cognitive skills and the communication skills to know what their communication function is when they initiate this. So that's POD. So just thinking about the layout of a communication book, if you've got lots of pages, it can be really helpful to make sure that the keywords stay in the same place on each page. So identify a handful of important words that are probably going to be needed in every scenario, such as, I don't know, pain or finished, more, stop, like, don't like, and just make sure they're in the same position on every page. It just helps with navigation. I'm sure we've all had that situation where maybe we've downloaded a new app on our phone and we're struggling to locate it because it's in a new location. Or maybe in the kitchen, if you change your cutlery drawer and you keep going back to the same drawer that you had it in before, it creates frustration and confusion if things are constantly moved around. So it's a bit like having a filing system Just make sure those important symbols are on the same place on every page. And something else to think about is if you feel that someone can only cope with a handful of symbols now, but in the future they probably will be able to cope with more, it's a good idea to plan ahead for that. So this is the example. So you can blank out or cover up the excess spaces that the person can't cope with at the moment, and you can fill those in later. But what's good about doing this in advance is that you won't be moving the placement of these important words. Whereas if you just made those 8 symbols all together, what you'd then be doing is moving the placement of those symbols when you're going to add more vocabulary. So that's a really good idea to plan for initially. Forward plan that and think about it, because what you don't want to do is be adding more and more vocabulary, moving all the symbols around, and actually every time you make an addition to the communication book, your client has to relearn where that really important symbol is. So do have a think about that. So you can color code symbols. There's a number of formalized systems like the Fitzgerald key according to the type of vocabulary. So in the Fitzgerald key, all the adjectives are blue, the verbs are green, the pronouns are yellow, and so on. It can be helpful just to differentiate the different parts of language for your client if that's going to help them to build sentences. And actually, it can also help you with modeling, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So this is just an example. We've got the pronouns in yellow on the top left. We've got the adjectives in blue. And it does break up the page quite nicely. And it gives you a quick reference for knowing where you want to go to. Like all the question words are in purple. So when I've got a question, I'm looking for a purple cell already. So it can be helpful. You could also match up the AAC color coding with any other color coding systems in a setting that's already in place for your client. So some colleges might be using colorful semantics, so you could follow that color coding system in the AAC book. Some settings are using zones of regulation, so again, you can match that up. You don't have to be fixed and using one particular color coding type. You can make up your own. So just some examples of how low-tech symbol systems can be used, all different ways. We've got a dinner mat there on the bottom, which is a really nice way to enable our clients to communicate during a mealtime. Quite often communication books are put away during lunchtime, and actually we still want them to be able to access their symbol cells. So a dinner mat's a lovely idea. You can have symbols on lanyards, in columns, or in a flip chart kind of format. You can have them in photo albums. You can have them as books. You can have them as folders, lanyards, key rings, whatever works. Whatever works for your client. And just again, think about, where are they going to be using this? Is it easy for them to pop in their bag? Is it easy for someone else to pull out and use partner scanning? Is it laminated? Is it robust? Is it nice and colourful? All these things you want to be thinking about. Just making it as easy as you can for your client. So we'll talk a little bit about modelling. It's also known as aided language stimulation. It's essentially a technique for you to teach your client how to use their new communication book or chart. And the way you do that is you use it. You use the AAC system while you're talking to model to them. So while you're having a naturalistic conversation, let's say you're watching TV together, you might verbally say, "Oh, you like this?" And you point to the like symbol as you're saying that. You don't have to point to every word that you're saying verbally. The idea of this is that you're providing symbol input essentially for your client. You are using the language that you want them to be able to use eventually. It's very low demand, it's very hands off. You're not expecting anything from your client, you're not demanding anything of them. You are just showing them how to use the system by using it yourself, and that's it. And what's really nice is that it's a very natural technique and it's very low demand. So for your clients that are demand avoidant, it doesn't tend to upset them, which is great. And it's really effective. It really works with most clients, really. It's generally used mostly for symbol users with a learning disability or aphasia. We don't tend to use modeling for clients with progressive conditions that are usually using text-based systems. This is just a really nice quote from Jane Corsten. So it says that the average typically developing 18-month-old has been exposed to 4,380 hours of spoken language every day from birth. A child who has an AAC system and receives 20 to 30 minutes of modeling a week will reach the same amount of language exposure in 84 years. I just think that's such a powerful quote, and it really hammers home the message that modeling is something that needs to be done as often as possible throughout the day. When you're handing over this low tech system to families and carers and support workers, please, please, please encourage them to model as often as they can, even if it's one or two symbols at a time. That's absolutely fine. Little and often is much better than having very intense periods of teaching, during the speech therapy session or communication time. Having the book out and using it throughout the day is the best way that our clients are going to learn how to use the system. And it's also a really nice way of valuing their AAC system as well. It's a way of having a shared interest and sharing a common language. So often our clients are surrounded by speaking people that are telling them to do this and that. And it can be really nice and refreshing to have a communication partner that's also using their system. So please do give it a go. It takes a bit of getting used to, but once you get the hang of it, it's great. And it also helps you to learn where all the symbols are, um, because you have to model it for your client. And it's absolutely fine to make mistakes and to model that as well. So if you're looking for a symbol and you can't find it, you can verbalize that and you can say, oh, where's cake? Let's look for cake. Ah, I think it's in food. I think it's in snacks. Yes, there it is. I found cake. That's absolutely fine. You're modeling problem solving as well. Just a quick note about our clients with autism and modeling. So sometimes our clients with autism won't take to modeling as readily as other clients. You want to have a think about what their joint attention skills are, and their imitation skills. So you might be doing a lot of modeling, but actually, if their joint attention skills aren't great, then it might not be very successful. You might need to go a step backwards and work on the joint attention first. And initially, with this client group, you might need to provide some more direct prompting. So generally with modeling, you don't do any kind of prompting, you're just modeling. But I think for this client group, I found it can be helpful sometimes to use a bit more of a prompt. And just to keep me on track, I use this prompt hierarchy, and it shows you the least invasive prompt is at the top there. That's a visual prompt, all the way down to a full physical prompt. So sometimes it can be nice, if it's needed, to give some partial physical prompts, to use a little bit of hand on hand, just to help the client get used to the idea of using the system. But I would say fade that prompting as soon as you can. As soon as they've got the hang of it, we want to fade that prompting, because again, with this client group, we know that they can become prompt reliant very, very quickly, and we do want them to be as independent as possible. So just something for you to think about there. Okay, so we're going to finish off with some last minute tips and tricks for you. So your AAC guidelines, try and make them as clear and foolproof as you can. We like to use a lot of photos because then it's just super clear for everybody. And we've got one of our patients here who consented for us to use this example. He looks up for yes, and he looks down for no. And we've got that in photos. And this section will be in all of his communication guidelines. It's on the back of his wheelchair, it's in his hospital room, it's in his notes, it's everywhere. So we're really making sure that everybody knows that this is the way Richard communicates yes and no. We also like to include some examples, again with photos. So just an example there, David uses a special stylus to point to his yes and no cards and type on the device. So we've got a photo of all of that when we've got David using his stylus. So again, it's really clear what the setup's meant to be and what the expectation is. And we also just put in there about how to charge a device. That's more for high-tech devices, obviously. But for low-tech, maybe you can just say, the communication book is kept in their tray at the end of the day, or so-and-so takes their communication book home with them every day on the bus. Please make sure it's in their bag. Whatever the support staff need to know, make sure it's really clear, really simple, and with photographs if possible. So I'm hoping you're feeling a bit more confident in designing and creating some low-tech systems for your clients. Do invest in some materials that will make your life easier. A laminator is a really good idea. Paper-based systems really have to be laminated to give them a bit of a longer life. If you can invest in simple software, that's really helpful. If you can manage to access it through the client's day center, that's really going to make your life a lot easier than going onto Google and downloading images one by one. Have a think about what format this low-tech AAC is going to be in. Do you need to buy bungee cord? Do you need to buy key rings? Have a little think. You can buy things pretty cheaply online on Amazon or even pound shops, and cheaper shops you can find quite a lot. So keep an eye out on a Saturday when you're out and about shopping. And please do go online and look for inspiration. As I said, there is lots out there ready-made for you, or you can ask us. You can pick up the phone, send us an email. We're really happy to help you think about the design and what you're creating and how it's going to work. There's a really long resource list at the end of this PowerPoint, so feel free to have a look at those websites. Some of them are literally downloadable resources that you can just go for. Other ones are more blogs and articles and books talking more about the theory of low tech and how you can design it. So please do use what's out there. There's plenty of support there for you. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in. We really hope that you've come away with some helpful strategies and tools to help you make AAC really, really successful for your clients. If you've got any questions, please contact us on the email address below. That's compass@rhn.org.uk. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.